Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, I've got a story that will leave you shocked and inspired. It's about a 12-year-old boy who was unfairly detained by the police while doing something as simple as taking out the trash. What started as an ordinary evening quickly turned into a terrifying ordeal for him and his family, but it didn't end there. His mother's determination to seek justice sparked something much bigger, a fight that would shake their entire community. It's a powerful reminder of how standing up for what's right can make a real difference. Stay tuned to hear how it all unfolded. And before we dive into the full story, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories. Now, let's get into it. Anthony Taylor was a bright, responsible 12-year-old boy who loved helping his mom around the house and spending time with his little sister, Layla. He was the kind of kid who never complained about chores and always did his part with a smile. Anthony lived in a peaceful neighborhood where he knew almost every face, every street corner, and every crack in the sidewalks. It was a familiar, comforting place where nothing out of the ordinary ever seemed to happen. Every evening before dinner, Anthony would put on his old sneakers, grab a trash bag, and head out to the big green dumpster at the end of the block. He never minded this routine. He enjoyed the quiet walk, humming his favorite tunes and daydreaming about being on stage one day, singing to a crowd. But one evening, something happened that would change everything, turning his simple chore into a frightening experience no one saw coming. As Anthony walked toward the dumpster, humming a tune and lost in his thoughts about planets and stars for his school project, he suddenly heard the screech of tires behind him. Turning around, he saw a police car come to an abrupt stop next to him, its white and blue lights flashing. Two officers stepped out, one tall with short brown hair, the other a stern-looking woman. The tall officer, Daniels, called out, "Hey kid, what are you doing out here?" Anthony, puzzled but polite, responded, "Just taking out the trash, sir." The female officer, Shaw, eyed him suspiciously. "Taking out the trash at this hour?" she asked sharply. Anthony shifted uncomfortably, clutching the bag tighter. "Yes, ma'am. My mom asked me to do it." But despite his explanation, the officers didn't seem convinced. Officer Daniels walked closer and demanded, "Let me see some ID." Anthony blinked in confusion. "ID? I'm only 12. I don't have any." His voice was soft, almost trembling, as he tried to comprehend what was happening. The officers exchanged a glance before Daniels spoke again, his tone firmer. "We got a report about someone suspicious hanging around here, and you matched the description." Fear began to creep into Anthony's chest. "But I live here," he protested, pointing toward his house just a few yards away. "That's my house." His words seemed to fall on deaf ears as Daniels reached out and grabbed his arm. "Look, kid, don't argue. You're coming with us until we sort this out." Anthony's heart pounded as he tried to explain again, his hands trembling. "Please, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just taking out the trash." But it was no use. Officer Shaw pulled out handcuffs, and before he knew it, they were being snapped around his small wrists. His mind raced with fear and confusion. Why was this happening? He hadn't done anything wrong. As the police car sped off, leaving the neighborhood behind, Anthony stared out the window, his face pressed against the cold glass. He wanted to cry, but he held it in, hoping this was just a terrible misunderstanding. All he could think about was his mom and little sister. How worried they'd be when they realized he hadn't come home. Back at the house, Mrs. Taylor was setting the table when she glanced at the clock and noticed something unusual. Anthony hadn't returned. Frowning, she muttered to herself, "Where's that boy?" Stepping outside, she scanned the street, expecting to see him on his way back, but there was no sign of him. Worried, she walked down the block toward the dumpster and immediately spotted something that made her heart skip a beat: the trash bag. lying abandoned on the sidewalk. Anthony was a responsible boy. He would never just leave his chore unfinished. A chill ran down her spine as dread began to creep in. Without wasting a moment, she rushed back home and grabbed her phone, dialing the police. But to her frustration, the officer on the other end didn't seem concerned, brushing it off as if Anthony had just wandered off. Anger and worry swirled inside her as she ended the call. Determined to take action, she quickly phoned her sister Carla. Within minutes, Carla arrived, her car screeching to a halt in front of the house. "What happened?" she asked, concern evident on her face. Mrs. Taylor explained everything, her voice tight with fear. "Something's wrong. Anthony wouldn't just vanish." Carla nodded firmly. "Let's go to the police station and demand answers." Without hesitation, they climbed into Carla's car and sped off, determined to find Anthony before it was too late. Mrs. Taylor and Carla arrived at the police station with a sense of urgency, their hearts pounding with worry and anger. As they stepped inside, they were met with indifferent glances from a few officers lounging at their desks. Without wasting time, Mrs. Taylor marched straight to the front desk, her eyes blazing with determination. "I want to report my son, Anthony Taylor, missing. He was taken while doing a simple chore, and I need answers now." The officer at the desk barely looked up, his tone dismissive. "Ma'am, calm down. We're doing our best to locate him. Maybe he just wandered off." Carla, her voice rising in frustration, snapped, "Wandered off? He's 12. He was taking out the trash. This isn't a game." The officer sighed, clearly uninterested in escalating the situation further. Just as Mrs. Taylor was about to speak again, a voice called out from down the hallway, "Mrs. Taylor." They turned to see Officer Rivera approaching, looking uncomfortable. Scratching the back of his neck, he began, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Mrs. Taylor's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" she demanded, her voice sharp with worry. Rivera shifted uneasily. "Two officers picked up a boy matching your son's description. Near your Mrs. Taylor refused to let the matter rest. Though Anthony was safely home, she couldn't forget the fear in his eyes or the injustice he endured. Determined to take action, she contacted several news outlets and shared her story. It didn't take long for the incident to gain public attention. Soon, local news channels were covering the story, and social media erupted with outrage. Hashtags like #Justice for Anthony and #Protect Our Children began trending, with people across the city demanding accountability. The public pressure grew so intense that the Oak Grove Police Department had no choice but to respond. 2 days later, the police chief held a press conference, standing before a crowd of reporters. He expressed regret for the officers' actions and announced their suspension, pending a formal investigation. More importantly, he promised change. New policies would be introduced, requiring all officers to undergo special training on how to properly interact with young people in the community. Though Mrs. Taylor knew the road to justice wasn't over, she felt a sense of relief. Her fight had made a difference, not just for Anthony, but for others as well. Over time, Anthony began to recover from the frightening experience, though he remained a little more cautious whenever a police car drove by. Life slowly returned to normal, but the memory of that night lingered. Mrs. Taylor, on the other hand, felt a deep sense of accomplishment. Their efforts had brought about real change. Officers were being held accountable, and new policies were put in place to prevent such incidents in the future. One quiet evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Anthony turned to his mom, his eyes filled with curiosity. "Do you think things will really change, Mom?" he asked softly. Mrs. Taylor smiled and gently brushed his hair back. "I believe so, Anthony. And if they don't, we'll be here to remind them. We'll keep fighting if necessary." Her words reassured him, and they sat there quietly, knowing they had made a difference. Because sometimes, Even the smallest voices can make the biggest difference. Thank you so much for watching this story. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more stories like it, please take a moment to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our future stories. We've got plenty more to share, and we'd love for you to be a part of our community. Once again, thank you for being here and supporting the channel. We appreciate you. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.